And the hard work doesn't happen during the interview. We were trying to figure out like, yo, how do I tell this guy Gilbert who hasn't worked at Facebook, who might not even know what Facebook Stories is, how do I explain him the so what? No, no, no. Instead of doing that during a face-to-face interview, I've done that beforehand.
Welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast, where we talk about the human side of data. In other words, data, communication, and personal development. My name is Gilbert Eikelenboom. I'm driven by curiosity, and my aim is to spread insights that you can apply in your life starting today. So, let's do it. Let's start MindSpeaking. If you want to land a job in data science, then this podcast interview is for you. Because today we have Singh on the show. He's the best-selling author of Ace the Data Science Interview and also the founder of DataLemur. And he helps to practice SQL questions and data science interviews in general. He has held various roles at Google and at Facebook and gained over 130,000 followers on LinkedIn. And that's for a reason, because in this interview, in this podcast, he shares a lot of insights on how to get the interview in the first place, and then how to ace the interview, how to make sure you tell about your experience in an understandable way and a concise way that appeals to the interviewer. Also, he's going to share about how to communicate your insights, how to communicate your data in a way that is understandable, especially when you talk to non-technical audiences. So basically, in the interview, he shared how to explain technical concepts like p-values and confidence intervals like you're talking to a 5-year-old. So a lot packed in this interview with practical insights and funny stories in this interview with Singh. Enjoy this episode. Hi Nick, welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast.
Gilbert, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so where I would like to start, because the name of your company, so you founded DataLemur. It's very triggering for me, the image of a lemur and a little monkey. And I was wondering, how did you come up with the name?
Yes. I love the movie Madagascar. It's like a DreamWorks movie. They have like several sequels and they feature a lot of lemurs because they're native to Madagascar. So first of all, I already loved lemurs, and there's even a spin-off show called around those lemur characters. I'm blanking on the name, but it's on like Netflix. And I used to watch it as a kid. So I loved lemurs, and then I knew my name had to have the word data in it because, I mean, that's the key thing. It's helping data scientists and data analysts prepare for their technical interviews. So I saw other companies with random names like Data Bricks, Data Dog, Data Camp. So I'm like, all right, I'll be data something. And then I looked at a list of animals and domain names that are open, and lemur was open. Lemurs were cute. Lemurs were easy to brand. And there's no other like kind of connotation for a lemur. You know what I mean? They're kind of rare animals. So I was like, all right, let's run with it. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's where he's coming from. And it's very catchy to me. It's memorable. It sticks in my head. So I think that's one of the benefits. And of course, I'm curious not just about the name, but also how you got there, how you got to finding DataLemur.
Yeah, it was a pretty natural evolution to start DataLemur. It's through my own book that I co-wrote with my buddy Kevin, who is an ex-Facebook data scientist turned quant on Wall Street. We wrote a book called Ace the Data Science Interview, and it sold 16,000 copies in its first year. It's all about technical interview prep. And the biggest feedback our readers gave us was, look, your SQL chapter about SQL interview questions asked during data interviews, it's great. It's fun to do these on paper, but like real interviews ask you these questions with like a coding editor or through a technical assessment platform. So I want to practice the same content online. So I'm like, all right, okay, whatever. So, we keep hearing this feedback, but after a year, I'm just like, all right, I've heard this too many times. That's probably the best next thing I can do with the book because I'm just on a mission to help data people land more jobs. And it just seemed like, hey, that time would be better spent on making it interactive. And that's kind of how DataLemur was born, because the big sell for DataLemur is, look, for hundreds of different SQL interview questions, you can practice them online. write the query itself, get it graded, and then see how other people solve the query as well in the discussion boards.
Yeah, and I can imagine that interactive part and making it practical makes it very useful for people, because just reading it from a book, of course, you can learn the theory, but you need to practice in order to get better. And I'm sure that helps so much in order for people to land those interviews. And later we'll talk about how to land those interviews, how to reach out to people, because you're very good at you have very good strategies in cold emailing, and also how to communicate an interview. So I'd love to dive in that a bit later.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's great to see the success with your book, because this really helps people with a concrete problem, right? How do you deal with those interviews? How do you need to show up, and how do you solve those SQL problems?
Yep, exactly.
What I also saw is that you've been on Fox News, right, and NPR to talk about COVID data. So can you tell us about that? How was that?
Yeah, before I took the leap to work on the book and DataLemur and just kind of take this full-time career around helping data scientists land jobs, I worked at a geospatial analytics firm called SafeGraph. And SafeGraph, what they had was this unique access to this data set of GPS-based location data coming from like a panel of smartphones. And they also had data around what are all the stores in the US and where are they located. And by located, I mean like the exact polygon footprint, the exact like bounding box for where does Walmart start and where does it end. So if you know where Walmart exactly is, and you know where these smartphone devices exactly are, you're starting to be able to understand how many people visit what stores, right? And that's what SafeGraph specialized in. So we were able to kind of repurpose this data set to understand how well are people staying at home or not. It's really funny, like while maintaining privacy, we can understand if you're at home or not based on home is defined as where your cell phone sits in the nighttime hours most days of the week, right? Because that's like our concept of the home. So if we have 28 days of location data and we notice like, oh, for like 20 of those days, you're in the same spot every night from like 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., that's a pretty good guess, and that's where your home's going to be.
Makes sense.
So what we were able to do is make this data set called like staying at home index, which helped us track like what counties were staying at home. So of course we wouldn't ever reveal like person level data, but at a county level, at a district level, at a state level, we're able to understand how well are people complying with stay-at-home orders, which we might forget about now, but back in 2020, that was the talk of the town. Like, oh, people have to stay at home, and like, wow, what's going to happen to retail? What's going to happen to malls? What's going to happen to movie theaters if everyone's staying at home? That was a talk of the town for the more business aspect. I mean, of course, there was other ramifications of COVID, but in the retail community and the customers we had, that was their concern in regards to COVID and their business impact. So yeah, we were able to make this data set, and it went viral. People kept linking to it. All the news media picked it up because it led to all these very interesting stories about like, oh, look at Texas. They're not staying at home, but California is staying at home, which is cool because Californians are being more healthy, except, oh wait, movie theater traffic in California has dropped 98%. And in Texas, it's only dropped 50%. Yet these the California movie theaters aren't getting COVID stimulus. And it started just driving all these kinds of stories. Plus, it drove a lot of unique research from the academic community, economists, public health people, computer scientists, all kinds of people, sociologists, everyone who had something to do with COVID and staying at home, which basically was the entire academic community in 2020. Started citing our data sets, analyzing it, and creating original research papers based on that data. So that kind of popularity led us to a lot of news stories. And of course, big firms like Fox News, CNN, NPR, Washington Post, New York Times reached out to us for comment. And see, I was wearing a whole bunch of random roles at SafeGraph, including a bit of product marketing and spokesperson, because I was kind of like the public face of this data set. So I would help out with analyses a little bit, but more so in communicating the value of this analysis to the PR and spokespeople, sorry, not spokespeople, the PR people and the reporters was kind of my job of like translating it, because I have this skill that I've kind of naturally had combined with like years of practice of about being both technical and then also being able to communicate with non-technical audiences. So that kind of made me the person to do it. So all of a sudden, I go from just this random, I was 24 at the time at this 30-person startup that 99% of the country had never heard. But within like a month or two, I was being on like the nightly news and podcasts, and we were mentioned in like New York Times like 8 or 9 times, Washington Post. So it was really, really fun. It was great for my ego, because my parents, when I left my job at Facebook, they were like, what are you doing joining this random startup that we've never heard of? Like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, Facebook is the talk of the town. Like, that's awesome. But once they saw me on TV, they're like, oh, okay, so this is like a real company. Like, okay, I kind of get what you do now. It didn't click in their head that this was a good career move until almost 1.5 years later, when I'm on TV talking about this company, and all our family friends are watching the same news, and they're like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool.
And then they realize, hey, maybe it's not that bad move after all, because
Yes.
if you get this publicity and these are kind of opportunities, I can imagine it makes them proud. And I'm wondering, because you've been talking a lot about how to communicate those insights also to people who are less analytical, less data oriented. What can you share some of your strategies, or how you do that? What or common pitfalls and tips?
Yes. I pretend I'm dumb. And the trick is, I actually am kind of dumb, but sometimes people think I'm smart. So the first thing is, usually in a lot of the rooms I'm in, I'm not the smartest person. And I always crave that, right? So throughout my career, even when I'm a very technical person or working at Facebook or Google, I'm still very technical, but I want to surround myself with people who can teach me something, which means I'm usually dumb, which means I'm usually asking questions or asking for things to be simplified. And then once I have this mental model of how something works, I try to understand, like, oh, how could I simplify it even more, right? So this thing that I just do in my head of being dumb, asking dumb questions, and being confident enough to ask other people to simplify their thoughts and then reworking it with them. And then it's sort of my own thing, if that makes sense. At that point, if they've simplified it down to me and then someone asks me about it, suddenly I'm able to regurgitate that, but it's almost like attributed back to me, right? Because unfortunately, this is how it works. In a lot of science and a lot of just real world stuff, the person who gets famous is not the person who maybe invented or discovered a thing. It's the person who kind of popularized it. So there's so many quotes wrongly attributed to Einstein, and there's so many random discoveries attributed to Ben Franklin that he didn't actually do. It's just that we know about it because of him. Basically, that's just what kept happening. I was able to simplify things, except it was just me more being dumb with the other technical person and then figuring out what the simplified version looked like. So it's just really about dumbing it down. The second thing is attention span. I don't have a long attention span, and a lot of technical people like to make fun. So as we get older, Gilbert, how old are you?
I'm 33.
You're 33. I am 27, and I'm just starting to feel older. Older meaning like, oh, there's a different generation and they do things differently than me. Like this whole TikTok thing was like beyond my time, right? So I mean, I worked at Facebook. I grew up with social media. I'm familiar with Instagram, YouTube, no problem. I grew up with all that. But the TikTok thing is the first thing where I'm like solidly out of college, solidly doing my own thing, solidly busy in my career. And there's a new social platform, a new way of being, right? For a lot of people, as we get older, it's very easy to dismiss this kind of social media trend, right? And then technical people especially, it's very easy for us to be like, oh, I only do long form technical guides. I make my own projects. I'm not going to watch a 6-second dancing video about Python. Like, I don't have time for that. That's all garbage. Like, I'm a man of serious intellectual curiosity. I read Wikipedia, But I don't, I kind of recognize that that's not where the world is headed. We're not headed towards more intellectual discussions on Wikipedia. We're headed towards short form 6-second videos. And I kind of have embraced that. I've been able to embrace that just because I've been rooted in social media for so long. I've been writing on LinkedIn for about 4 years. Definitely encourage your readers to give me a follow. Got like 130,000 followers on there. Before that, I would post funny things on Facebook just for my friends, and like it was a game for me to kind of get likes, and I love comedy, so I like being funny, and I'd post my own jokes and memes. And now looking back, it's kind of cringy, but in high school, that was my first time like writing stuff out in the public. And basically there's just me embracing less attention spans, which means you have to explain things simply and you have to explain things in a not long-winded way, has given me the gift of being able to communicate with non-technical audiences. Because the fundamental truth is, as soon as you talk technical jargon, people's eyes glaze over. They don't want to hear from you. Second, no one cares about you. No one cares about you. No one cares about what you have to say. They care about what you can do for them, which means as soon as I talk 100 details that I care about, but you're not technical, they don't mean anything to you. You don't care about them. I quickly realize no one's listening to me. No one cares. So as soon as I start talking in the way that people want to be talked to, which is short form, because our attention span that's been ruined by TikTok, right? That's the same attention span we take to our daily encounters, right? So first it started with long videos, then it started with like short Instagram stories and reels, and we have TikToks, right? Just attention span has been coming down, and to realize that and know that other people don't care about me, they don't give a shit about what I have to say. They just want to know how I can help them, and if I can just deliver that quickly, that's the ultimate way to communicate with non-technical audiences. And I recognize the irony of what a long-winded answer that was.
I appreciate that answer because it told me a few things, because you're talking about pretending to be dumb or dumbing it down, right? And to me, that's such a powerful mental model, because we're all cursed with knowledge, right? The curse of knowledge. You might know this concept where it's very hard to empathize with people who don't have certain knowledge or experiences. Like business stakeholders don't have the same data and technical experience that we data professionals have. And to overcome that, dumbing it down is powerful. And there's something interesting also in the answer from your second point about the attention span, because I think even the older generation, so if you talk to an executive, right, that person is older and didn't grow up with TikTok, but still the attention span got shorter. And in general, the attention span of those more senior stakeholders is very short as well, where data people like to present many details and all the technical stuff. So also even for those people, a bit more TikTok mindset might actually benefit in those presentations.
Right. Like the way technology is permeated through all age groups, if you meet with older people, they will complain, oh, these kids don't read books anymore. They're always just reading these, their mind's addicted to these things. But if you ever see an older person, how they like juggle their email, then they're getting a WhatsApp message, they're getting a Slack message, they're thinking about their kids, they're thinking about their wife, they're thinking about their business, they're thinking about the gym, in this day and age of like distraction, people don't want to admit it, but everyone's attention span's gone down because there's just so many more cool things to do on your phone and your laptop, and there's so many people to talk to, and there's so many messages to write back. So it just works through all age groups and all attention spans.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and if we're talking about attention span, you wrote a book, a very successful one, but I know it takes a lot of time to write a book. So how did you manage that? Because your attention span might be a bit shorter compared to the people 20 years ago, and it takes a lot of time and attention span to write a book, right? So take us through that journey. How did you have the mental clarity and the patience to do so?
Right. So I'm a big fan of Atomic Habits, which is all about you don't rise to like your aspirations, you like kind of fall to the level of your systems, right? Which is this idea that like, look, I want to be a good writer and I want to be dedicated and all that, but I'm not actually that good with willpower. I eat tons of candy and junk food. Like that's just how I am. So how did I write a book? It's because one, I quit my job and I knew I had to do it. Okay. It's this, there's
How
a
did
fun,
you know?
so, let me take it back. Let me tell you a story about Lil Uzi Vert. He's a famous rapper for the audience who might not know Mr. Uzi. Lil Uzi Vert, he has this really good story about how he was working like a random retail job and wanted to be a rapper. So one day he got a face tattoo because he knew that once he got a face tattoo, he couldn't work a normal retail job. He couldn't be a cashier. Like, he had to make it in rap because there was no other choice, right? Yes, this is a little bit of a self-destructive thing to do, but for doing really hard things, honestly, I don't have a better way. Like, there are other people, man, they eat right, they go to the gym, they sleep 8 hours a day. I'm not that kind of person. I do what interests me. I stay up late playing video games and writing books or doing whatever. Like, I'm not that disciplined. So when I quit my job during the COVID time, I knew, like, hey, everyone always has a book idea. And Gilbert, you also have a great book too. So kudos to you. And I don't think you quit your job to write the book, right?
No, yeah, but I was partly on the sabbatical, and I can imagine it's so much harder if you are in a job and then writing a book. But I was the last part I did while still having a part-time job. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, good. So you had some flexibility too. I meet too many people who have ideas for startups, ideas for books, ideas to be a social media creator, and they never get anywhere. I'm also a little bit that way because if I'm tied to a job, it makes sense. But when I quit my job, that face tattoo element was there of like, look, I don't have a job to go back to. I have to make this work. So I can't just BS around writing a book. I have to get it done. The second reason why I knew I had to do it was because just genuinely in 2020, when COVID hit, I saw so many of my friends, peers, the community lose their jobs because all these companies are doing layoffs because they're not sure, hey, if you're in the travel or hospitality space, if you're Expedia, your Travelocity, your Eventbrite, is there going to be, a future in your business, right? Just the whole world slowed down as things shut down. There were layoffs. And there's this really famous book called Cracking the Coding Interview that helped me get jobs at Facebook and Google and Microsoft. And I was like, okay, why does a book like this not exist for data? So around that same time, I'm like, look, I know this book needs to exist. 2, my LinkedIn posts where I talk about this stuff are already doing really well. So I have some sense that this idea is popular and it's a little bit de-risked. 3, I've just quit my job. I have no other thing to do. Like, I have to make this work. And then 4, this is the right time to do it because data is a really big thing in 2020. And I mean, even now. And secondly, people are really experiencing crazy turmoil in their careers. And then college a lot of people went back to school. A lot of people transitioned from a retail job to something more technical. It was just what was needed at the moment. So all those things kind of made me have this sense of inevitability that, like, look, I need to get this done. It doesn't matter if I'm disciplined or not. I need to sit there and grind it out. So it was really that. It sucked, but it got done.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think the face tattoo is a really interesting and fascinating metaphor, to go all in and there's no way back and burn your bridge, basically. And also what you pointed out about your LinkedIn post, I think is such a underestimated value of social media and LinkedIn in specific, that now, of course, it's a channel to promote your work and get ideas out, but also to get the feedback, what resonates with people. And it's so interesting. And there's also a lesson for data professionals here, data scientists, to see what people value, right? You always need to do kind of market research, even if you're just working as a data scientist, to see what problems are hot and what problems you can solve with data, not just when you're writing a book. So it's fascinating to hear that story.
Exactly. A lot of people think about social media as a way to help themselves. So if I post, I'll get likes, or I'll get more consulting engagements, or I'll get this or that, which is fine. And it's totally a real thing. The way I like to think about it is first, like, think about, like, how can it help you learn about a customer's pain point better, right? And we talk about this all the time in the lean startup approach of, like, developing an MVP, listening to customers, iterating fast. We talk about this for product development or technology all the time, but we don't apply it to our own, like, skills or writing, right? So let me give you a concrete example. Let's say, Gilbert, you're trying to really up your data visualization game. You could read a lot of books about it. You could make some projects. You could do some projects at work about it for over 2 months. Or you could make really quick visuals from a data set, take 10 different data sets on Kaggle, spend 2 hours on each data set, make a viz, make these 10 interesting infographics and post them on social media and see which gets the most likes. see which gets the most like, oh, wow, this is cool, or oh, wow, I love how you did this, right? One, you just built your portfolio. But two, this process of seeing what hits with people, what doesn't hit with people, helps you understand, hey, how do I better communicate data-driven insights in a visual manner? And suddenly, the 11th time when you're doing it for your work or you're doing it for your client, then you know you're going to do amazing because you got 10 repetitions from a big audience of people who will not lie to you, right? Because if you don't like something, you don't hit like on it, right? Like people will just keep scrolling. So no one will lie or BS you when you post it on social media. So I just love it for getting rapid feedback. And that's kind of how the book started as well. I posted a whole bunch of stuff. I saw what things resonated, what didn't. And the long form parts that did resonate the most basically became the cores of my chapters. And yeah, the rest is history.
Fantastic. And a book is obviously written communication, so part of our communication in our work, in when you work in data or software engineering, is also written. And what have you learned about written communication, or what tips can you give for the audience?
For written communication, again, people, I like to think like psychology drives so much of this. Like, look, I'm not a psychologist or have any background in that, but just from knowing people, people do a lot of things to help themselves, and that works in the short term, but doesn't help in the long term. So what do I mean by that? When people write books, they often write to make themselves look good. Or, hey, if I write in a complex way, people will think I'm smart. Or if I, explain this in a long-winded way and it's really long, people will think I'm really technical and they'll book me and they'll think I'm a really great data scientist, right? But I always flip it in the reverse way and say, okay, what does the reader want? The reader wants to learn this in the easiest, fastest, quickest way. And if some technical details are missing, if they're wrong, well, I wouldn't say wrong, but if they've been like simplified, so maybe they're not correct in all edge cases, but they're a simplified mental model and there's a simpler analogy that might not be 100% correct, but it's a 99% correct way of explaining something in a much simpler way. I'll always take those shortcuts and trim my things down, shorten them, and put them out there. That's my biggest thing for communication, which is almost the same insight I had for oral communication too, which is attention spans are short, write simply, talk normally. Don't talk to make yourself look cool or look smart, because in the short long term, it'll be like, wow, that guy's so smart. I have no idea what he's saying, right? In the short term, that's what we think. Oh, wow, he's so smart. Look at all this complex stuff he's saying. But in the long term, that person never gains an audience or never gains authority because no one has a clue of what you actually need.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense. And it all comes down to helping other people, right? To empathizing with your audience, what they want. And as you mentioned, not to write for yourself, to make yourself look better, because in fact, you don't make yourself look better by writing this much, right? Just by writing 3 sentences, which are concise and to the point. And there are a lot of parallels, because how I see your work is that you help people get jobs, right? Very smart people who have done great projects, but often the hiring managers or the recruiters don't know about them, right? Or they don't know how to ace the interview. And also my work, the reason I do my work is so a bit later in the stage, when they do have a job, when they communicate the insights, they often have amazing insights to share, but often the audience, the business, doesn't appreciate them or understand them, because it's all wrapped up in such a mess of detail that technical people find interesting, but business stakeholders find not. So I see a lot of similarities and parallels where we need to think more about other people rather than ourselves.
Exactly. That's what we always have to do, because this is like an active service. Data scientist is all about helping your stakeholders. Social media is all about helping your followers. Book writing is all about helping your readers. So it's always like an active service towards those people, and you can never lose sight of who your end customer, client, reader, follower, whatever they are. You can't lose sight of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So let's talk a bit about helping people landing that dream job, right? Which you have achieved many times in the past, whether people are data scientists or people working as a software engineer. Let's talk about 2 things. First of all, the application, right? How you get the interview in the first place. You talk a lot about cold emailing. So share a bit about your thoughts on cold emailing.
Yes, I'm a big fan of reaching out to people you don't know, right? So instead of getting a warm introduction where someone introduces you to someone, that's called warm, I'm saying go in cold, write to somebody you do not know. I'm a big fan of this because if you write the email in a good, convincing way, you keep it short, you say why you're respond worthy. Like you don't play coy, you don't be bashful. You really come out and say, "Hey, look, here's what I can do for you and your business. Here's why I think you should talk to me. Are you free next week to talk? Here's my calendar link." Boom. 4, 5, 6 sentences can start opening doors if you're writing the email in a good enough way and you're writing to the right people. And most importantly, you are someone who's respond worthy. So I want to emphasize that last place so I don't sound like a snake oil salesman. Obviously, there's some base level of like skill and portfolio projects and resume and work experience you need to have to make the strategy work, right? So if you've got 8 years of data analyst experience and you're applying to a machine learning job and you cannot speak to anything about machine learning, it's not going to just randomly get you a job, right? Or if you don't have data science experience and suddenly you write a cold email, it's not going to just like magically get you into data science. But if you don't have data science experience, but you've built some portfolio projects, you've taken some classes online, you have a GitHub project or two, but you don't have the formal degree, and you used to work as a nurse, and you write an email to a healthcare company, a health tech company, and you say, look, I know your recruiter or your resume screener. I mean, you don't have to say this, but we both know a resume screener or recruiter is not going to want to interview you because they're just looking at, oh, bachelor's in nursing. Okay, moving on next, right? They're, that's just how it is. Or they say, hey, this is the core requisite, move on, right? But where this works is if you're write the cold email and you write to the hiring manager directly. Look, Gilbert, I see you're a hiring manager in health tech. I love what your company does and how they use data science to help nursing professionals make less mistakes. I'm a nurse turned data scientist. Here's my portfolio project where I analyze Kaggle data to do X and Y. I also built a Tableau dashboard, which you can find here. I'm also analyzed the data and explored it with SQL queries, and you can find the GitHub repo here. I'd love to talk to you about this job. And do you have time next week? Done. That was about six sentences, 8 sentences, probably like 120 words. You could read this in a minute or two, and you write to the right person, and you just appeal to them like, hey, look, I'm a nurse transitioning into tech. Suddenly, you might just be ahead of someone with a master's degree, right? Who didn't do this and just easy applied on LinkedIn amongst 100 other people and didn't really showcase why they're good for a healthcare tech company or what they can really build or do. They just claim, oh yeah, I have this certification and this degree, give me a look.
Right. Yeah, I like that because it contains 3 things. It shows, how to send a message that is concise. 2, also that you understand the position of the other person. You've kind of done your research and you understand what they are and what industry they're in, and you connect it to your background, right? Being a nurse and how you can solve their problems. So I really like that method. And
yes.
Yes.
And the fourth thing I like to emphasize in this is links, right? One is, oh, I studied this, I did that. I emphasized here, like, hey, here's a link to my Tableau dashboard, and you just hyperlink it. And by the way, I have my SQL query in my GitHub repo, hyperlink it. If someone doesn't even click the hyperlinks, still they're like, wow, this person didn't just BS their way here. It's not that they did a random cert or course online and they claim they know SQL. It's like, oh yeah, they've actually done something. And even if I don't ever click on it, I'm like, wow, they really say they could, how many nurses know GitHub? How many nurses put a dashboard on Tableau? On Tableau Public, right? Very few of them. So I think that's a big emphasis. And then of course, this is in the downside case. If no one even clicks the link, it's still helpful. And of course, most people will click a dashboard link. If you say, oh, it's an interactive, fun dashboard that looks at patient mortality, you'll click that and be like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Exactly. So in that text, you also need to kind of sell, right? Why it's worth watching and worth spending at least a minute on. And I think many people working in technology, they kind of hate the word sales because it sounds sleazy. It sounds like it's not academic. But I think data professionals and engineers can learn a lot from salespeople actually by understanding their audience and how to communicate in a persuasive way.
Exactly. All these preconceived notions on like, oh, why are you dumbing it down? Oh, sales is bad. All these social media is stupid, right? These are all things that like we techies kind of permeate our brain. And I know this because look, I've been in engineering school. I've been around really smart people who love math, who love coding, who think, oh, all these fads are stupid or they're men of science, men and women of science, like what are we doing on this stuff? But like the reality of it always is like, hey, sales and marketing people know something about human nature too. Social media is successful because it taps into something we all know about human nature. Short form content is successful because it taps into something about human nature. So it's like always lean into the human nature to get better results instead of going against the grain and being like, oh, why should I sell myself? Why should I reach out to someone, like that feels weird. That feels too aggressive. Like, they don't know me. No, it doesn't matter. Reach out to them. Because you know what? Recruiters reach out to you and they don't know you. Companies reach out to you. They don't know you. So why can't you reach out to the hiring manager recruiter yourself?
Exactly. Why do you think people are reluctant to do so? Or why do you think people don't think about this?
A lot of it just comes from mindset and security. If I send an email and you don't respond, I'm going to feel bad. I'm going to think I'm bad. But if I apply on LinkedIn and you don't respond, I don't feel bad because, well, 200 other people have responded. Most people on LinkedIn just don't respond when you apply to a job, so whatever, right? But if I write to you and I spend 5 minutes on it and you don't respond, I'll feel sad. So why even take that risk, right? That seems scary. That seems bad. That seems not fun. Who wants to be rejected by 9 out of 10 cold emails? Sure, 1 in 10 cold emails works and gets you a interview with a company that you normally wouldn't have been able to interview with. But 9 out of 10 still lead to failure where no one responds or they're like, hey, not interested. But mostly they don't respond. No one's as mean to say like, oh, not interested, move on, if you write the email well enough. So I think it's like security of like, people feel insecure in their stuff. So they'd rather attack like, oh, this doesn't work or it's not going to work for me. Yeah, and that's the other big part where it's like, hey, it's going to work for someone else, but it can't work for me because I'm unique. That's the other big mindset I always had to tell people is like, you're not that special. You're not that unique, because I've been asked so many questions in the last 2.5 years about breaking into data science, data analytics, and getting jobs. And everyone thinks they have a unique thing. I talked to 50-year-olds who are breaking into their first data job. They're like, look, I'm unique because I'm older and there's bias. I talked to PhDs. They're like, oh, there's bias because I'm seen as too academic. I talked to community college folks because it's like, oh, there's bias. I didn't graduate from a 4-year degree. Every person, oh, I have bias because I'm coming from healthcare. Every person is looking for an excuse for why it might not work for them. And one of the easiest ways to, excuse your own lack of doing things is like, oh, well, if it doesn't really work or it probably won't work for me, why should I even try? Let me save myself some heartache.
Yes.
Once
So
you get over
hopefully
these mental hurdles, like anything can happen. You can write to Gilbert and be like, hey, Gilbert, I want to come on your podcast. I like your book. And you'll respond, right? And like 2 years ago, I might have been scared to do that. But now I'm just like, all right, whatever.
Yes. And I think if you adopt this mindset, we see that it has nothing to do with us, right? Writing the message. If we dare to do so, and if we write a good message and people don't respond, maybe it's just this person was busy, and we don't need to feel bad, right? It has nothing to do with us. We don't need to feel bad about not getting a response.
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't have to feel bad or weird because you know that, hey, sometimes somewhere will work out because I'm someone of quality. I've done quality projects. I have real skills. So even if this company doesn't like me or they don't really respond, it'll work out somewhere else. That's exactly it. And that security, though, you cultivate. A lot of this, though, I want to again emphasize. The skill here is writing a good email, but it comes after you've built a body of work, right? So I don't want to say like, oh, okay, so today I don't know data science. Instead of learning data science and building a data science project, I will go write emails, right? This first starts with having some good fodder, good experience, good projects, good contributions, good skills that you've built up. After that, that gives you the security and humility to face failure and just keep going. Because you're not scared because your work stands for itself.
100%. And earlier you mentioned understanding human nature better. And I would like to tell the listeners 2 books if they're interested. So one is To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink. That shows that everyone is selling, whether we know it or not, and especially if you have kids. You're definitely selling attention and selling what they need to do and what they need to eat. And then the second book is by Robert Greene, Laws of Human Nature. It's a bit of a deeper book, but if you're a bit into psychology, you will definitely appreciate it and learn a lot about the laws of human nature. So we spent some time about how to get the interview. So now let's take the next step and to talk about how to ace the interview. You wrote a book about this, so you probably have a lot to share about that. So what tips and advices can you share about interviews and how to do them?
There are too many. That's why I had to write a 301-page book. But I will maybe highlight 1 or 2 that I think are kind of interesting because, again, there's just too many, and data interviews cover SQL, machine learning, coding, statistics, probability. Usually there might be an open-ended kind of case study, businessy case study. So it's too much to cover exactly in this one podcast, but 2 things I would like to give tips that are meta tips is 1, don't let the fact that data interviews cover so many things scare you from preparing. Some people often feel like, well, if they ask anything under the sun, how can I even study for it? How can I prepare? You know what I mean? Like they get so intimidated that's like, well, if they could ask you anything, let's just wing it. What can I do? I want to shift people away from that mindset because you can absolutely prepare for these interviews because questions do come in certain patterns and there are ways to practice those patterns. Let me give you just 1 quick pattern. Of course, the book is filled with 201 questions, which map to almost like 40 different patterns that you need to know. But let me just highlight 1. 1 that actually you might find interesting, and that's actually been a topic of this podcast, is this concept of my way of testing your statistics knowledge, and a lot of hiring managers' ways of doing this is asking you to explain a concept like a confidence interval or a p-value like you're 5, or like you're a middle schooler, or like you're not technical. Some way of basically seeing, can you dumb down a technical concept into simpler words? This is a really popular thing because it tests whether you know the statistical concept at hand. And this actually works for machine learning concepts as well. People ask you like, hey, can you explain bias variance trade-off in a more simple way? Or can you explain me how linear regression works, but pretend I only know high school level algebra? I don't know calculus and all that, but just explain it to me in terms of y equals mx plus b. Just high school level algebra 1 or 2. That's a really common pattern, and a good way to practice these is to verbalize them yourself, because there's a big thing between like, oh yeah, p-values, I know what those are, and then actually like being like, oh wait, how would I describe a p-value just in general? Because there are nuances to these kind of concepts, right? Like how do you interpret a confidence interval, or what does it mean to reject the null hypothesis? What does that actually mean? There's actually nuances there. People will explain it wrong. So that's 1 thing, is to record yourself saying these things out loud, not just thinking it in your head. Second is, I love Reddit. There's a subreddit called r explain like I'm 5, which is all about dumbing down technical concepts. So if you search up like Reddit explain p-values like I'm 5, you'll find some good results. Or explain stochastic gradient descent like I'm 5, you'll find some good analogies. You read enough of these articles and you'll start to work on your own technical communication ability once you see how other people masterfully explain it themselves. And guess what? Reddit has an upvote system. So you already know the good answers are on the top, right? And that's how you can learn from the best. And that's how you can yourself improve your technical communication skills, which is a win for the interview, but it's also a win in life, right? In the day-to-day job.
Right. That's such a good idea. I wrote it down. I don't know this Reddit thread explaining p-values like I'm 5. I think it's very useful. I'm gonna look it up.
Yes, it's called ELI5, which stands for explain like I'm 5. But just go on Google rather than looking on the subreddit. Just say like Reddit explain p-values simply, or explain like I'm 5. And you'll find a lot of these threads. And of course, the whole point is you don't have to be 5 to understand these things. A lot of them say, hey, just pretend I only know high school level or middle school level math, right? No calculus, no linear algebra. How would you explain X and YZ concept?
Right. Good. Thank you for the tip. Um, Something I also wanted to ask is because many people know about the STAR method, right? In interviews, is this something you can recommend, and how do you recommend people use that, and what are some mistakes you see that people make?
Yes, I love STAR. STAR for behavioral method interviews is this formula that you can use where you explain the situation, task, action, and result for every story you tell. I think it's useful. It's a useful framework. Why it's useful is because I've done so many mock interviews with really smart technical people who still make mistakes on something as simple as, oh, there's this 4-step formula. What happens is, us techies, we like to dive into the actions we took, the A part of STAR. Often we'll forget to set up the situation and task because in our head, we were steeped in this technical problem for months. So obviously we know what the situation and tasks are. But the interviewer, they have no idea what you're talking about. They don't have that technical concept. Even if they're very smart, they might work in a different business line or different industry than you did. So it's very crucial to explain the S&T part, the situation and task. And finally, the result is another thing that techies often forget because we're so busy talking about the actions. We forget about the result, especially since a lot of times in the story, the result comes in the end. And it's very easy to mess up your landing, or be like, oh yeah, I spent 80% of my time telling you about the situation and the results and the task at hand and the actions I took. I forgot to explain the result, or like, what was the so what? So what I like to do is tell people like, hey, start with the so what, like repeat the result. So it would be like, oh, tell me about a time. I'll give you an example of an Amazon behavioral interview question. Tell me about a time you went against the status quo. Okay. They're looking for a little bit of contrarian thinking, or they're just trying to understand, like, when did you like speak up or do something different? If I was to answer that, I would say the result. Hey, I thought that Facebook stories was bad for new users, and I did an analysis and I found that it actually was, which actually changed the Q4 roadmap for the Facebook stories team. Let me tell you a little bit more about the situation. See, I started with the result. Like, whoa, you changed the roadmap for this big product org and you found something? Okay, that's cool. Then I say the situation. Oh, we had a hunch that new users, they didn't really like Facebook stories and that it might impact their new user experience because it was a complicated product and new users on Facebook don't have any friends. And Facebook stories as a product has less inventory because it's way less popular than other modalities of posting. So it was this big unit that was at the front of their page that was just almost always empty, and it was always confusing because it's not what typical Facebook does, because the stories feature was new at that time in 2018, and it was almost like a clone of Instagram stories and Snapchat stories, and it was a much poorly done clone that no one wanted to use really. And I had a hunch like, hey, new users, because my team was all about protecting new users and improving their retention rates. So I looked at everything as a lens of like, if I was a new user, what would I do? So I dove into the data. Task was figure out, is Facebook stories good or not? So I dove into the data. I wrote a whole bunch of SQL queries. I found real bugs in the product. And I figured out that, oh yeah, actually there is a material impact on retention rates for new users. So that's how, in the result was, I was able to actually change the whole roadmap and kind of bring the Facebook stories leadership, this big investment area. I was able to tell them like, look, we got to pay attention to new users because clearly they're behaving differently than regular users. And this is impacting both new user retention rates, and it's not helping anyone in the Facebook stories team because these new users aren't using stories. And yeah, that's the result. Now, of course, I'm a little rusty because this story I'm telling you is from 2018, which is now quite a few years ago. And yes, I rambled a little bit, but hopefully me starting with a result made sense. Hopefully I explained the situation task correctly. The actions were kind of brief because I know that later on, if you really care about my actions, you're going to ask me, oh, okay, hey, Nick, so tell me what SQL queries did you write, or what data sets did you use, or what was the specific gap you found? That can always be asked later, right? And we'll dive into that. And that's where I get to show off how good I am at SQL and understanding product gaps. But right from the get-go, when I'm just trying to explain you the story, I keep it high level and kind of do my best to breeze through star.
Right. And I like that because makes it very concise. And if they ask about it, you go to this mental appendix and you take the information from there and then give that information to them. And also by starting with the results, right? It piques their interest. It kind of sells why they should listen well to this to the rest of the answer, and it hooks them in. So I really like that approach.
We like to clown on BuzzFeed, right? BuzzFeed style articles. Six things you'll never believe. 3 is gonna shock you, right? You know? But there's a reason BuzzFeed and that kind of style of copywriting is so popular, right? So I mean, I don't want to sensationalize my answer, but it really is like I figured out a big gap in Facebook stories that no one knew about. Stay tuned, right? It's basically that's what I'm telling people. Like, oh yeah, I single-handedly found this huge gap in this multi-billion-dollar investment project that affects millions of new users at Facebook. Sorry, hundreds of millions of new users a year. And no one even knew about it. Let me tell you how. Boom. I start with the result, I pique your interest, and then I go into it. Obviously, look, I'm not going to talk like that in an interview, but you can see that if you practice this as an exercise, you realize, wow, your stories turn out to be a lot more compelling and they're a lot more understandable than if I was like, oh yeah, Gilbert, I went against the grain by the time I wrote a window function in SQL and I did all this, and then I forget to even explain you like, what are the SQL queries doing and what am I finding and why does it matter, right? Something I also want to highlight, Gilbert, that you mentioned was mental index, right? So I have this quick index of STAR. What are the key 4 points I need to hit? Especially what's the result I need to hit? How did I build up that mental index? It's because I practiced this kind of question so many times and I have the same, 6 stories that I kind of say over and over again to answer a wide variety of questions. I advise listeners to this podcast, if they want to improve their own oral communication skill during an interview, practice makes perfect, but specifically, don't leave things to your memory. Because once you start having to remember oh yeah, what was the result? What was the key number? What you should just do is make a quick little thing in Google Sheets where you have 3 or 4 of your big projects or big wins or big accomplishments, and then just write the STAR. And just try to boil it down to 1 sentence. Maximally 2, but keep it to 1 sentence. This exercise is going to clear up your thinking so much. Because if you know your 4 biggest accomplishments, and you know the 1 sentence way to describe a situation, task, action, result, when you're in an interview, almost any behavioral interview question can be mapped back to your 4 main projects. And the kernel of those things is always those 4 sentences. And the hard work doesn't happen during the interview. We're trying to figure out how do I tell this guy Gilbert who hasn't worked at Facebook, who might not even know what Facebook Stories is, how do I explain him the so what? No. Instead of doing that during a face-to-face interview, I've done that beforehand in my Google Sheet. And it takes me a good 30 minutes, an hour to distill a 2-month project into 4 sentences, right? But that's where you come off as a much better speaker, is when you do that pre-work beforehand. So then I just have to remember the 4 sentences and not the full story and simplification.
Yeah, because if you need to come up during the interview, it's almost impossible, right? Because you're probably a little bit nervous or very nervous. You're thinking about so many things. You're gonna be in your head, and the more you think, the less you are with the person in front of you. You're not connected, so that doesn't work.
That's exactly it. And then people always, I have smart technical people who don't specialize in these kind of communication things. They say, oh, Nick, but won't I sound over-rehearsed, over-prepared? Won't I come off as ingenious? I pronounced that wrong, but not genuine, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And it's look, under the stress of an interview, unless you're a really slick salesperson or a professional spokesperson or whatever, it is so hard to seem confident and composed and not nervous and to deliver a cogent story around something technical that the other person might not have context on. So even if you prepare a lot, you're still going to do some slight variations and mess ups. So it's no chance that you're going to sound over rehearsed or over prepared. This is only going to help you. That's the one main thing. And the second thing is humility, is look, I'm not that smart. I'm not that articulate. So I'm going to spend the hours beforehand so that during an interview, I don't have to be on the fly, articulate and crack jokes, or like figure out how to distill 2 months of work into 30 seconds, right? It's because I'm not that smart. And so you do the pre-work. And I think people can adopt that mentality a lot of like, hey, look, I'm not that smooth talker. Let me go do the pre-work and you'll be better off for it.
100%. So yeah, thanks a lot for the conversations today. Where can people connect with you or follow you?
Yeah, definitely. Folks can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have 130,000 followers there. Just look up Nick Singh. You can also follow me on Twitter. Nick Singh Tech is my handle. I have about 20,000 followers there. I'm getting new on TikTok. I'm not going to shout that out. If you see me, you see me. I'm a little embarrassed by it because I'm not very good at dancing. And finally, of course, check out the book, Ace the Data Science Interview on Amazon, as well as sign up for a free account on DataLemur, and you can start practicing real SQL interview questions today for free.
Fantastic. I really appreciate your approach. Your focus on helping other people is very close to how I like to approach business and life. And I will put all the links in the show notes so that people can reach you and benefit from your work. So yeah, thanks a lot for the conversation today. I really enjoyed. I learned some new things, explaining p-values like I'm 5. I'm gonna look it up because it's very beneficial to see, how you can communicate things in a simple and persuasive way to others that they understand and appreciate. So thanks a lot for being here today. Is there anything last you would like to share with your audience, or a big takeaway from today?
No, thank you for having me, Gilbert, and hopefully people enjoyed my little takes on psychology and humans, because honestly, that was more of our conversation today, which was fun. I don't normally get to talk about that, so I appreciate you having me on.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Nick, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, bye.
Cheers, man. Do you want people to listen to your data and increase your business impact? Then take my free email course or do the quick self-test of your data communication skills. Go to mindspeaking.com and start learning today.